Hey everyone, thanks for watching the Upstream Ag Insights YouTube channel. My name's Shane Thomas. Um, this is the 27th edition of Upstream Ag Insights for the week of July 19th. So traditionally, I go through a few of the different articles and topics that I cover for the week. This week, however, I wanted to try something a little different. I'm going to focus in on one and talk a little bit about some of the nuances that I didn't necessarily talk about within the article or within the topic. And so I think it'll give a little bit more insight and create a little bit more value for readers or listeners and hopefully gives a little bit more from a takeaway perspective and more to chew on and think about. And so the topic this week that I actually wrote about this is my blog, and so a little bit of emphasis when it comes to I enjoy this topic. Ag retail, retail in general are passions of mine. Strategic analysis when it comes to Porter's Five Forces, combination of things that I'm passionate about that I like to think about often in my spare time and just apply to different areas of business and agriculture. And so, really, I start out with just introducing what Porter's Five Forces is. And really, it's a strategic framework to analyze your organization, analyze your industry, and really see where your niche and your fit and your opportunities are, what your challenges are, how you compare to competitors, how you are able to win, so to speak, when it comes to obtaining share of wallet, when it comes to being able to innovate, all those sorts of things. And so, really, there's five different components. And I think the biggest aspect that this framework doesn't necessarily talk about, but I think we can talk about here right now, is that these five are looked at in silos, but ultimately they're continually influencing one another. They're compounding, they're moving, they're shifting, and the industries themselves are changing constantly. And so this is something that you can continually use, think about, utilize, and just want to go through these topics, and I'll introduce some of the components that I talk about in the post and the blog. And so we'll start with the threat of new entrants, and really in ag retail, this is a hot topic. And so this is essentially what are the barriers to entry, what are the moats you have, so to speak, brand loyalty, what are the capital requirements, you have excessive capital needs to get into the business. And so when we look at some of these components from an ag retail perspective, traditionally it has been pretty difficult to get into ag retail, and it still is today, whether it's to secure supply, whether it's to actually build out the infrastructure, obtain a customer list, all those different components. I touch a little bit on FBN. A large organization has had hundreds of millions in funding, and they have about, call it 12,000 customers, and they're starting to make a dent, but they haven't even been able to secure supply of manufactured goods. If you look at Canada, there's some things in the courts right now when it comes to FBN and the BASFs and the Cortevas. And so shows that it can be difficult to secure supply in the space for a number of different reasons. But when we look at this from a 2020 perspective, there's the digital component coming in as well. So now all of a sudden, ag retail's traditionally been in one specific geography. You have a retail that typically would service anywhere from 50 to 60 kilometers, call it 30 to 40 miles, maybe a little bit out from that to 100, 120 kilometers or 60 miles somewhere in there. And again, that can vary, but roughly speaking, whereas now that we actually have the internet, that we have these digital components, this can actually be much further out. And there's being initiatives to actually work on being able to service from a more decentralized space. And so this is where we have the commodity eggs coming in, the agro clubs, these different organizations that are looking to deliver the opportunity to service customers outside of a traditional geography. And so I think you even look at this too from a distribution perspective. The last mile is super important. Getting that route to the customer is super important. And retailers have traditionally owned this space and will continue to own this space for a significant number of years in the future. I think personally, we just might see some shifts in how that looks. But if you look at other spaces, say consumer goods, Nike starting to look at a direct to consumer space. When you look at Lululemon has really changed. I mean, obviously this has been since the start of their business, but really changed how different retails look at things. And this was even done with the founder's business before with West Beach. And so they've vertically integrated and then went direct to consumer. And so there is also the threat of new entrants in the sense of how distribution and customer relationships can change. So that's something I talk a little bit about, and I think I find pretty interesting in terms of how that will shape um, pricing, information asymmetry, that'll shift how customers purchase, how retails go about approaching the marketplace. And so leads us into bargaining power of buyers. And really this is the number of customers, the size of each customer. So if you have a large number of customers that are all pretty small, you have a lot of power. So for example, Walmart doesn't necessarily have a lot of power. That might not be the right way to put it, but they can influence their customers heavily and significantly. Whereas if you only have a few select customers, say it's 4 or 5, all of a sudden that changes the dynamics, and that customer has a lot of power over you. So you're doing everything you can to get those 4 or 5 customers business. And so when you look at agriculture and ag retail in general, we tend to see quite a few customers. So it depends on, you start to get into a macro retail side of things and you have thousands of customers, but one specific retail location could have 200 or 250 customers, somewhere in that range. And for clarity, when I'm talking about ag retail, I didn't specifically look at it from any one retail's perspective. I tried to look at it from a generalized, broad brushed industry perspective. And so I think that's where the opportunity for this can really be, to lay a foundation, but then dive deeper into the future, whether it's for an individual listening or whether it's for myself to build upon in future blogs, which I do intend to do in the future. But when it comes to the buyer side of things, farmers don't necessarily have a lot of power over the retail. They do have a little bit of price sensitivity, obviously, but in terms of what the retails offer, it's generally a pretty similar product line to the competitor down the road. And so when you start to look at this, they have a significant ability to substitute. The switching costs aren't that high. You have things like credit, you have things like the need for different services, whether that's application or otherwise. But generally, farmers can shift from one retail to another, and typically you have a decent level of competition. We'll talk a little bit about that moving forward. But really, there's an opportunity to get that customer bought into buying from you when it comes to mitigating that bargaining desire from those customers. And that gets into things like proprietary products. Next, threat of substitute products. So the number of substitute products available, buyer propensity to substitute. And so I took this more from the approach of, how do these different retails manage their services and their product offerings. And again, this is where I talk a little bit about, I have a bias here, but talk a little bit about how do you get to build out a product that is specific to your core customer, that you're focusing on, that you're trying to add value to. And I think the adding of value comment gets talked about and thrown around so much in agriculture, but it never gets defined. You don't necessarily have people talking about what is the definition of value? How do my customers value this specific service? Which subset of these customers am I targeting, and what do they value? How do they value? What are they willing to pay for it? What do I need to do to add that value? And so I think that's something that gets missed out on quite often. And so there is an opportunity for significant substitute when it comes to these retails and when it comes to the retailer in general. Bargaining power of suppliers, won't touch too much on that, but essentially when you look at whether it's fertilizer, crop protection, seed, there's only so many suppliers or manufacturers of these products. So the retails really are in a position of less power when it comes to that relationship with their suppliers. They do own some of the pipes and the distribution and the customer relationship, which does tilt things back in their favor in some ways, but these suppliers have done a good job of leveraging their higher margin and gross margins and putting that back into not just R&D for new products, but marketing, so that they can build that desire for a customer to use a specific product and position that to the retailer. They've also leveraged things like their programming and grower programming and retailer programming to, again, shift some of that power back to themselves. And And I think even, something that I should have touched on too is the bundling of different products together. And when we look at retails in general, they're not just selling products, they're bundling together services, they're bundling together things like credit, agronomic scouting, application tools and technologies. And so when you start to unbundle some of these different components, you can actually have small portions substituted, which really breaks apart the entire bundle, so to speak. And so if you have services bundled in with the products, all of a sudden your crop scouting service gets substituted by the independent consultant over down the road. And so all of a sudden that changes your ability to manage the substitute of products. That hinders your ability to bargain with suppliers even. And so there's a couple of different things. And again, it shows how this is all interconnected. I could probably go on all day and ramble, but next up is the rivalry among existing competitors. And so, I think there's a lot of commentary that there's not enough competition in ag retail. And if you look at other industries, I would disagree or say that it's not as big of a deal as others tend to make out. If you have a retail sitting in a small town in Alberta or Illinois or wherever, you have anywhere from 3 to 4, maybe even 5 different competitors in that given area. And so it does allow for a lot of competition. It does allow for farmers the opportunity to price and check around and look at what's happening elsewhere and get some different insight. And so I think that's something that we talk about a lot, and I go a little bit more into it in the article and blog as well. And so I think when you look at all of this, this is a very broad and generalized overview, but when you start to look at all of this together, all of a sudden you start to see some of the nuances, and you can see where you can win as a retailer. And so when I look at things like proprietary products, that's something that some of these bigger retailers have done really successfully. I note of like Nutrien and Winfield United do a good job of understanding what does their customer need, what does the marketplace miss currently, what could go there to help that customer, that farmer out in producing better, more profitable crops. And they take the initiative to do research, do market development, understand what could be, and put that time into it 3 to 5 years out, saying, hey, this is something we are going to focus on. And that helps them when it comes to managing the relationship with their suppliers, getting more bargaining power with suppliers, getting more bargaining power with the customer, because now they offer a product that's unique to them, necessary for the farmer, and necessary in the customer's minds. And so that also made sure that other retailers maybe aren't necessarily offering that product. And so it gives them a differentiation. And that's something that I think is significant, and something that is the reason we've seen some of these larger retailers do so well and on a macro level. And so I think that kind of covers the basics of what I wanted to go through with Porter's 5 Forces and Ag Retail. The read is a little bit long. I think it's about 2,300, 2,400 words, but I think it is a nice base to build upon when it comes to how do we think about ag retail, what's going to happen, where are things going to go. This gives a little bit of a starting or a launching point, and I give another number of examples when it comes to other tools to utilize in conjunction with Porter's 5 Forces, Porter's value chain analysis, SWOT, as a couple examples. And so I think this really gives the ability to think and consider what needs to be done, and how can a retail win, and how can a retail add value to an organization moving forward, and what needs to be done by that retailer to have a meaningful impact in the marketplace, have a meaningful ability to expand, all these sorts of things. So I'd love to hear people's feedback, whether it's around this recording, whether it's around the post itself. I love hearing feedback from everybody. I think before signing off, just want to touch on a couple other things. There was a few other pieces of information or news this week. Microsoft and Land O'Lakes partnership, which I think is fascinating in a number of ways, and I touch on that in Upstream. Nutrien purchased AgBridge, and so that is a unique offering. That's something I think adds a lot of value to their business and differentiates them. They continue to add to their business. I was joking with a colleague the other day that Nutrien is like a grandmaster playing chess with some of their strategic initiatives. And so I think what they're doing is interesting to follow continuously. And then I follow up a little bit on ag tech exits, which I had a lot of feedback on last week. So thank you to everybody for sending me emails and notes and messages. It's always interesting to hear what people agree with, disagree with, and why. And so I love being able to learn through that process. So thank you for sending messages and look forward to your feedback on ag retail and Porter's Five Forces as well. I hope everybody has a great week.